Lively music filled the hall lit by golden chandeliers, and laughter echoed between glasses of champagne and exaggerated toasts. The smell of expensive perfume and the presence of arrogant figures made the company party an ostentatious spectacle. It was supposed to be a night like any other, a mandatory event where fake smiles and superficial conversations circulated among the halls decorated with banners of achievements and performance awards. But that night, everything changed. There she was. My wife. Dancing. Not with me. But with him. The boss. And it wasn't just any dance. It was not an innocent moment of fun between colleagues. There was something more. The way he held her, his hands sliding around her waist, his eyes fixed on hers as if no one else existed in that room. The touch was intimate, exaggerated. The proximity of their bodies, the way their faces almost met, as if they shared a secret. Something that, until that moment, I didn't know. I stood there, motionless, as if my feet were glued to the floor. The world around me continued to spin, but inside me, everything had stopped. My chest burned, a feeling of suffocation filled my throat. My fingers closed around the glass of whiskey, feeling the cold glass in contrast to the white-hot fury that consumed me. That's when it happened. The boss tilted his face close to hers and said something. A whisper that made her smile. A smile that wasn't meant for me. A smile she hadn't given me in a long time. And at that moment, it hit me. It wasn't starting there. It wasn't a momentary approach, a slip-up at a party where alcohol loosens barriers and drives wrong decisions. It was something planned. Something cultivated. Something that had been happening for a long time, without me realizing it. The shame hit me like a punch. How have I not seen it before? How was I so blind? I took a deep breath, trying to control the urge to cross the room and snatch her from his arms. But something inside me changed. It was no longer impulsive anger, it was no longer just momentary hatred. It was something deeper, colder. It was there, as I watched my wife surrender to another man's arms, that I decided. The decision came like a flash. Quick. Irrevocable. Cruel. She would never expect that from me. No one would wait. And when the music stopped, when the applause sounded and the dancing ended, I knew exactly what to do. I walked up to her, held her hand, felt her warm skin still under the other man's touch. She looked at me in surprise, perhaps expecting a scene. But I just smiled. A controlled, dangerous smile. I want a divorce. The impact of those words was immediate. His eyes widened, his breath hitched for a second. But it was what came after that completely destroyed her. And I'm going to tell everyone in your family who you really are. Her expression fell. The blood drained from his face. His lips trembled. No. But it was too late. That moment, that room, that dance, everything was about to have consequences she could never imagine. And what happened next, no one could have predicted. No one was ready for what was to come. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictitious, but they carry an indisputable truth. Betrayal destroys lives, tears hearts and leaves marks that can never be erased. Every story we tell here shows the real consequences of disloyalty, the weight of wrong choices and the price you pay for a lie. Now, get ready for a shocking story, intense and full of twists and turns. Listen carefully, and draw your own conclusions. The city lights twinkled softly through the large window of Ethan and Olivia's apartment. The reflection of the light spread across the glass, creating a yellowish glow that contrasted with the darkness of the night sky. It was a calm night, the kind of night where thoughts came like waves, bringing memories, questions and, sometimes, that subtle restlessness that couldn't be named. Ethan was sitting on the couch, his fingers slowly turning the glass of whiskey on the coffee table. It wasn't a habit, but lately, he found himself doing it more often than he'd like to admit. Olivia was in her room, finishing getting ready. They had an important event that night, a party at the company where he had worked for years. Their relationship has always been something that many envied. A beautiful, successful couple with a story that seemed worthy of a romantic film script. They met in college, at a time when the world seemed full of possibilities and dreams seemed easier to achieve. Ethan remembered the day he saw Olivia for the first time. She was sitting on the campus lawn, reading a book with her face illuminated by the morning sun. There was something about her that made him stop. It wasn't just her beauty, and Olivia was, in fact, a woman who attracted attention wherever she went, but there was something about the way she furrowed her eyebrows when she turned a page, as if she were completely immersed in that universe of words. He approached, made some joke about the book she was reading and, to his surprise, she smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind of smile that made someone feel special because it was the reason for it. Since then, things have happened as a natural flow. Going out to cafes, endless conversations about everything and nothing, kisses stolen in the middle of a sentence. They were the kind of couple that seemed predestined. Ethan was always proud of the relationship they built, the love they had, the respect and admiration for each other. He asked her to marry him in their senior year of college, on a rainy night when they were stuck in the car, laughing at their bad luck because they didn't have an umbrella. Olivia accepted without hesitation, her eyes shining, and that night Ethan was sure that nothing in the world could separate them. The years passed and, like any couple, they faced challenges. The beginning of my professional life was exhausting. Ethan started working at a large company in the financial sector, where he soon showed talent and dedication. His efforts were rewarded with successive promotions, until he became one of the most prominent managers. Olivia, on the other hand, followed the marketing path, carving out her space in the corporate world. Time began to become scarce, and marriage, previously filled with spontaneity and romantic gestures, gradually became more about responsibilities, bills to pay and tight deadlines. Ethan didn't like to admit it, but he missed the time when everything was simpler. He and Olivia still loved each other, of course, but there was something that felt out of place. Moments for two had become rare, dinners filled with long conversations gave way to quick meals in front of cell phone screens. Olivia always seemed distracted, busy with something he couldn't identify. On the other hand, he himself felt constantly exhausted, trying to balance the weight of his professional responsibilities with trying to keep his marriage alive. Over the past few months, he's noticed subtle changes in Olivia's behavior. Small details that perhaps no one would notice, but that for him, who knew every nuance of her, were impossible to ignore. She was more distant, sometimes she seemed lost in thought while he spoke. There were moments when he would pick up his cell phone and smile slightly, as if he were reading something special. At first, Ethan ignored these signs, attributing them to the stress of work and the tiring routine. But doubt began to grow within him, planting seeds of uncertainty that he struggled to uproot before they took root. That night, as Olivia finished getting ready in her room, Ethan took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair, trying to banish any uncomfortable thoughts. I didn't want to be the kind of paranoid man, the one who looks for problems where they don't exist. He trusted Olivia. Always trusted. They always believed that what they had was strong enough to withstand anything. But why, then, did that feeling of restlessness persist? The sound of Olivia's heels echoed through the hallway as she approached. When she appeared in the room, Ethan had to admit that she looked stunning. The black dress fitted to the body, the loose hair falling in soft waves over the shoulders, the red lipstick highlighting the contour of the lips. He watched her for a moment, allowing himself to admire the woman he chose to spend the rest of his life with. "How am I?" she asked, turning slightly on her feet, as if she knew she already had the answer. Ethan smirked, standing up to approach her. He ran his fingers over her face, feeling the soft skin under his touch. "You look amazing, as always." Olivia smiled, but there was something different there. Something Ethan couldn't decipher. They left the apartment and headed to the party. The venue was luxuriously decorated, filled with elegantly dressed guests. Ambient music, waiters circulating with trays of champagne, groups of people chatting animatedly. Ethan greeted some co-workers, always polite, always maintaining the posture expected of someone in his position. Olivia easily blended into the environment, socializing with a naturalness that has always been hers. But as the night wore on, Ethan couldn't shake that feeling that something was wrong. He noticed the way Olivia seemed more excited than usual, as if she was in an environment that awakened something different in her. And then, he saw it. On the other side of the hall, among the guests, was the head of the company. An imposing man, respected, admired by many. Ethan knew him well, had had dinner with him at corporate events, exchanged business conversations. There was never anything more than that. But when her eyes met Olivia's, something cold ran down her spine. He tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating. But what happened that night would change everything. It would change his view of marriage, of the woman he loved, of the man he respected. And when the music began to play, when the bodies began to move to the enveloping rhythm of the dance, Ethan finally understood. Nothing would be the same again. The music seemed distant, muffled by the weight of what Ethan felt inside him. His mind screamed, saying that he was exaggerating, that there was nothing wrong, that it was all just a reflection of tiredness, of accumulated stress. But his heart knew. He knew it even before his eyes confirmed it. There was something wrong. Something that was getting out of control, something he couldn't name, but it was there, in front of him, like a silent warning that he refused to ignore. Olivia laughed at something her boss said, her eyes shining in a way Ethan hadn't seen in a while. Her body tilted, her proximity, the almost imperceptible gesture of her hand resting on his arm. Small details, subtle, but that screamed in the eyes of anyone who paid attention. Ethan took a deep breath, pushing his thoughts away, trying to convince himself that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the restlessness grew, like a rising tide, slow and inevitable. He observed the environment around him, people talking, toasts rising, laughter filling the space. Everything followed its normal flow, as if nothing was wrong, as if his reality wasn't about to fall apart. When Olivia glanced in his direction, for an instant he thought he saw a trace of hesitation on her face. But it was too fast, fleeting like a bolt of lightning that cuts through the sky and disappears before anyone can react. She smiled, a smile he knew well, and beckoned him to join them. He hesitated, but went. I needed to be close, I needed to hear, I needed to understand. The boss welcomed him with a firm handshake, the usual friendly tone, the confident posture that exuded security. Ethan reciprocated, maintaining his composure, controlling the uncomfortable feeling that was spreading inside him. They talked about business, about the company's results, about strategies for the next quarter. Everything common, everything as expected. But there was something between the lines, something that hovered over them like an invisible presence. Olivia continued to laugh, occasionally touching her boss's arm, leaning in slightly as she spoke. Ethan felt every touch like a blow, every laugh like a sharp blade slicing through his confidence. Time passed, and the party continued its course. He walked away for a few moments, needing air, needing to distance himself to organize his thoughts. Standing near the bar, he ordered a drink and watched. Olivia was still with her boss, and now she seemed even more involved in the conversation. Ethan wanted to believe that this was all a figment of his imagination, that he was seeing things where there was nothing. But something inside him said no. And then, it happened. The music changed to something softer, and the room filled with couples heading to the dance floor. Ethan watched as the boss reached out to Olivia. He saw her smile and accept. He saw the bodies get closer, the movements fluid, natural, too intimate to be just a casual dance between acquaintances. His heart raced, and his stomach lurched as if struck by an invisible blow. He should do something. I should intervene, interrupt, get her out of there. But he couldn't move. He just watched. Every second of that dance was torture. The boss's hands were firmly on Olivia's waist, their faces were close, their smiles were exchanged. The way her eyes sparkled, as if she were in a world apart, a world where Ethan didn't exist. He clutched the glass in his hand, feeling the cold glass against his warm skin. The lump in his throat grew, and his breathing became heavy. Everything made sense now. The discreet messages on his cell phone, the distant smiles, the moments when Olivia seemed far away even though she was by his side. It wasn't in your head. It wasn't paranoia. When the song ended, Olivia let out a low laugh and smoothed her hair, looking almost euphoric. The boss whispered something in her ear, and she laughed again, leaning in to respond. Ethan didn't need to hear the words. What happened there was enough. Something inside him broke, something that could never be fixed. He didn't need a confession. He didn't need concrete proof. It was all there, clear as day. The betrayal was right before his eyes. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he felt something as intense as that mix of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. The lump in his throat made it difficult to even breathe as he stared at Olivia in the car, the silence between them filled with everything that wasn't said. She looked away, her fingers restless in her lap, as if she didn't know where to start, as if she didn't have the words to explain what she had done. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening, feeling the weight of everything he had seen that night. The dancing, the looks, the smiles. The evidence was there, out in the open. But he needed to hear it from her, needed her to admit it. The tension in the air was suffocating, a minefield ready to explode at the slightest wrong move. Olivia tried to say something, but her voice broke. He didn't let her get away, not this time. How long has it been? The question cut through the silence like a sharp blade. She hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt, but still unable to look at him. Ethan, how long, Olivia? His voice was firm, but there was something else there, something that betrayed the tiredness of someone he loved and no longer knew if he could trust. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, he saw the woman who had once promised to be his partner forever. But that image was quickly replaced by the memory of that dance, that closeness, that silent betrayal that destroyed him without the need for a single word. A few months. The answer hit Ethan like a punch. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to control the tide of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Months. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a one-night slip. It was something cultivated, fed, hidden. He tried to convince himself that it didn't change anything, that the fact that it had already happened didn't make any difference now. But it did. And a lot. Did you look at me every day knowing that you were lying to me? Would you sleep with me while you were with him? She closed her eyes, pain written all over her face. I didn't want it to be like this, but it was. Her answer made no difference now. Nothing he said could fix what was already done. Her silence spoke louder than any explanation. He opened the car door, needing air, needing to get out of there before he said something he couldn't take back later. But before he could turn away, her voice called him back. There's something you need to know. The way she said it made something inside him twitch. Ethan turned his face slowly, his eyes now filled with something other than anger. A feeling. Olivia swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling quickly, as if she knew that after that there would be no turning back. My family already knows. Ethan blinked, confused. What? They already know, Ethan. My mother, my father, my sister, everyone. The shock was instantaneous. A crushing weight came crashing down on him, and for a moment, everything seemed to spin. He couldn't form a sentence, a thought, anything that made sense. Did you tell them? The voice was low, but filled with disbelief. No. He said. It was as if an electric current ran through Ethan's body, awakening a fury he didn't even know he was capable of feeling. What? He told them, Ethan. He said he loved me and wanted me to leave you. The world seemed to stop. Every piece of the puzzle he was trying to put together now made sense. The way his in-laws' looks had changed in the last few weeks, Olivia's sister's discomfort when she spoke to him. The way he felt out of place, without knowing exactly why. He was already being cheated on long before he found out. He was already the last to know. And you what? He forced the words out, his voice scratching his dry throat. Her eyes glittered, a reflection of what looked like regret. I said I couldn't do that. That it couldn't end everything like this. But. Her pause was enough for him to understand what she couldn't say. She didn't refuse enough. She allowed him to believe he had a chance. She allowed him to tell the world what should have been theirs alone. Ethan took a step back, feeling the distance between them grow into an irreversible chasm. You humiliated me. You exposed me. I didn't want it to be like this, Ethan. But it was. His voice no longer carried fury. He was carrying something worse. Coldness. And in that instant, Ethan knew. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a sentence. And everything that came next would no longer be about saving what they had. It would be about something much bigger. The silence between them was unbearable. Ethan felt his head throbbing, his pulse strong against his temples as he stared at Olivia, not knowing exactly what he had left to say. She looked away, her shoulders hunched, her body betraying the weight of guilt, but now it didn't matter anymore. He no longer cared about how she felt. Humiliation was a fire that burned inside, corroding everything he once believed to be solid. He clenched his jaw, feeling anger bubble up, an anger unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just because of what Olivia had done, but because of everything she allowed to happen. And now. His voice cut the air like a blade. Olivia looked up slowly, as if she feared what would come next. What do you mean? Now that your whole family knows. Now your lover has decided to expose everything before you even have the decency to admit it. Now that I'm the idiot who was the last to know, his laugh was bitter, filled with something cruel. What happens now, Olivia? She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her silence was as revealing as any confession. Ethan shook his head, exhaling a short, humorless laugh. You want to know? I'm tired. He turned away, walking towards the door, but her voice stopped him. Please don't go like that. He closed his eyes, fists clenched at his sides. Her request was like poison, a final insult thrown onto an open wound. He turned on his heel, his eyes filled with something that made Olivia take a step back. Do you want me to stay? For what? To hear you tell me that wasn't your intention? That he didn't want things to get to this point? Who loves me, but fell in love with someone else? She tightened her arms around herself, her nails digging into her skin as if that could stop his words from reaching her. I didn't want to hurt you. His laugh was low, almost a whisper. Didn't you want to hurt? But it hurt. You didn't just hurt, Olivia. You destroyed it. He took a step toward her, eyes dark and intense. You knew this would end up destroying me, but you continued. It continued to the point where there was no turning back. Do you want me to forgive you? She took a deep breath, her eyes moist. I want you to listen to me. I've heard enough. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, feeling his heart hammer against his chest. He needed to get out of there before he said something he regretted. But before he could move, she rushed forward, holding his arm tightly. I was weak. I let things get out of control, I made bad choices. But that doesn't erase everything we've experienced, it doesn't erase what we feel for each other. He pulled away from her touch as if burning. How do you feel about me, Olivia? Tell me, because I honestly don't know anymore. She opened and closed her mouth, confusion in her eyes. I love you. Ethan's laughter filled the space, but there was no joy in it. You don't love anyone but yourself. She trembled, as if those words had been a physical blow. Ethan didn't wait for a response. He left, feeling the cold night air hit his face as he walked aimlessly. He didn't know where to go, he just knew he couldn't stay there, he couldn't breathe the same air as her, he couldn't drown in that pain for another second. The city seemed indifferent to his pain, as if the chaos within him was insignificant compared to the life that continued to take its course. He walked into the first bar he found, ordering a drink strong enough to silence his thoughts. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. He didn't know. Everything seemed blurry, without color. The sound of laughter around, conversations thrown into the wind, everything seemed distant. He stared at the amber liquid in the glass, lost in thought, until he felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. He turned his face slowly, meeting eyes he hadn't expected to see. "Are you well?" The female voice was soft, but there was something about it that made him pay attention. He blinked a few times, focusing on the face in front of him. She seemed genuinely concerned, and for a moment, Ethan felt something different. It wasn't pain, it wasn't anger. It was something new. And at that moment, he realized. Maybe that wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something he still couldn't understand. The glass slowly swirled between Ethan's fingers, the ice melting into the bottom of the whiskey as his thoughts spiraled ever darker. The bar around him pulsed with life, a stark contrast to the darkness that consumed him within. He never imagined that his life would come to this point, that the woman he loved would be capable of something so cruel, so destructive. But here he was, trying to make sense of a chaos that could no longer be fixed. The woman who had approached was still there, watching him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Her eyes, so different from Olivia's, held something Ethan hadn't seen in a long time, genuine empathy. He didn't know if he wanted to talk, if he wanted to share any part of this with anyone, but for some reason, her presence wasn't uncomfortable. He leaned forward slightly, letting out a heavy sigh before finally looking up at her. "You seem to be running away from something." Her voice was soft, unhurried, unjudgmental. He let out a weak, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Maybe I am." She sat down next to him, ordering a drink from the waiter before crossing her legs, studying him for a moment. "What happened?" He hesitated. "Not because I wanted to hide it, but because the words seemed too heavy to say out loud." He stared into the bottom of the glass for a moment before finally responding. "My wife cheated on me." It was the first time he had said it out loud, and the weight of the words fell on him with crushing force. He expected to feel more pain as he said it, but surprisingly, there was something freeing about the confession. As if admitting that, as if getting it out, was the first step in leaving it behind. She showed no surprise, no exaggerated compassion. He just nodded, as if he understood. "And what are you going to do?" Ethan let out a long sigh, rubbing his face with his hands. "I have no idea." The answer was true. He didn't know what to do next. Everything he had built, everything he believed to be solid, had crumbled before his eyes, and now he found himself on unfamiliar ground. The path forward was uncertain, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have a plan. The woman beside him raised her glass, watching him for a moment before finally speaking. "Whatever you decide, just make sure it's something that takes you forward, not backward." He stared at those words for a moment, letting them settle in his mind. "I didn't want to be consumed by resentment, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life carrying that weight. But how do you move forward when everything around you seems to be falling apart?" He was grateful for her company, but felt like he needed air, space, time to process everything that had happened. He left the bar, walking through the streets aimlessly, feeling the cold night wind against his face. Olivia's words echoed in her mind, the boss's revelation exposing his betrayal, the way he was made the last one to know. The humiliation was profound, but more than that, what hurt was realizing that there had never been real regret. Olivia had a chance to stop. He had a chance to fix things before they got to that point. But she didn't stop. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He took out the device and saw her name flashing on the screen. The initial impulse was to ignore it, but something inside him made him respond. Olivia's voice came shakily on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" He didn't respond right away. "I didn't want her to know." "Did you call me just to ask that?" She sighed, and he could almost picture her face, her nervous hands, her lips pressed together. "Ethan, I need to talk to you." He laughed, but there was no fun there. "Now do you want to talk? After everything? I know I made a mistake. I know I destroyed everything. But there's something you need to know." He felt the anger return, a heat boiling beneath his skin. "There's nothing I need to know, Olivia. I already know everything that matters." She hesitated, but then her voice came out firmer, carrying something Ethan didn't immediately recognize. "No, you don't know." He closed his eyes, feeling the frustration growing. "Olivia, I'm tired of your games." "It's not a game, Ethan. Not now." Her tone made something inside him twist. Against his will, against what his pride screamed, he stopped. He took a deep breath. What it was? There was a pause on the other side. "My family." He frowned. "What about your family?" The silence that followed was too long. Long enough that he felt a new wave of uneasiness rise within him. "Ethan, they knew even before you did." The world around him seemed to shrink. "What? I didn't just betray you. I exposed you. They knew before you did. All the time, while you smiled at them, while we had dinner together, while you thought everything was fine." He felt his throat close. "Did you tell?" "It wasn't me. It was him." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Did he tell your family before me?" She didn't respond right away. And then, when he spoke, his voice was filled with something Ethan couldn't identify. "He wanted me to stay with him. He wanted me to choose. And me." She didn't finish. Ethan felt the weight of everything unfolding before him, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was something much worse. He wasn't just cheated on by his wife. He was ridiculed, exposed, treated as a supporting character in his own life while everyone around him already knew the truth. And now, faced with this new revelation, he knew. There was no turning back. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same as before. Ethan felt his fingers grip the cell phone so hard that for a moment he thought he was going to crush it. The silence between him and Olivia was almost palpable, a gulf that separated everything they were and everything that was left. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line, ragged, strained. I didn't know if it was guilt, regret, or just fear of what would come next, but in that moment, none of that mattered. He wanted you to choose, the phrase echoed in his mind, like a curse that refused to go away. The revelation that Olivia not only betrayed him, but allowed his entire family to know before he did, gnawed at something inside Ethan, something that would never be the same again. He squeezed his eyes shut, feeling the chilly night air against his skin as he tried to maintain clarity, but the feeling of being deceived so deeply made everything spin around him. And then? His voice was low, cutting. "What did you choose, Olivia?" She hesitated. And just that brief silence said it all. Ethan let out a weak, humorless laugh, the kind of laugh that comes when there's nothing left to lose. "You didn't choose anything, did you? You simply waited for someone else to make the decision for you." I didn't know what to do." "Of course I knew. You just didn't want to deal with the consequences." Her silence confirmed what he already knew. Olivia never intended to tell, never had the courage to face what she was doing. She just wanted to keep both options open, hold both sides until one of them gave in. "You made me look like an idiot," Ethan's voice was cold, emotionless. "And what's worse, you did this while smiling at me every night. I didn't want it to be like this." But it was. And then, he hung up. No more apologies expected, no more empty words allowed. He walked aimlessly through the streets, feeling the sounds of the city around him become background noise. The lights reflected in the puddles of water on the floor, distorting reality like a broken reflection of the life he thought he had. The betrayal in itself was already devastating, but the fact that it was exposed to everyone, that he was the last to know, made everything even worse. He imagined the pitying looks, the fake smiles, the whispered conversations when he left a room. Everyone knew. Everyone saw him as the fool who didn't realize what was happening right before his eyes. He stopped in front of a building he recognized immediately. The law firm. Without thinking much, he entered. The place was almost empty at that moment, but the receptionist recognized him and made a brief phone call before directing him upstairs. In the office, a middle-aged man with a serious expression was waiting for him. "Ethan," the lawyer said, motioning for him to sit down. "I was already expecting you to show up here." Ethan just nodded, feeling the weight of that decision solidify within him. "I want to file for divorce immediately." The lawyer crossed his fingers on the table, studying him for a moment. "He is sure." Ethan let out a short laugh, a dark gleam in his eyes. "There is nothing left to be saved." The lawyer sighed, picking up some papers on the table. "All good. Let's do this the right way." Ethan spent the next few minutes listening to the instructions, signing documents, processing the technical details of what would be the final separation. As this happened, something inside him grew firm, something that replaced pain with determination. He wasn't going to let Olivia get away with this without consequences. When he left the office, his phone was vibrating non-stop. Missed calls, messages. He ignored them. Now, he was no longer a wounded man trying to understand what happened. Now, this was someone who knew exactly what he needed to do. The next morning he headed to the apartment. Olivia was there, sitting on the couch, as if she was waiting for him. His face was pale, his eyes sunken like someone who hadn't slept all night. She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand. "You don't need to say anything." She closed her eyes, pain written all over her face. "Ethan, I already asked for a divorce." She shuddered. "I know." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you know. As? Has your boss informed you yet?" She looked away, and that was the confirmation he needed. "You never intended to say anything, did you?" "I was afraid." "No. You were afraid of losing everything you had here. But he wasn't afraid of losing me." She closed her eyes, holding her hands tightly. "What do you want me to say? That I was wrong? That I was selfish? That I was a coward? Yes, I went. I did everything wrong." Ethan was silent for a moment, watching her. "I don't want to hear any more excuses, Olivia. It doesn't change anything." She looked into his eyes, and he realized he finally understood what he saw there. It wasn't just regret. It was despair. "Have you spoken to my family yet?" He let out a dry laugh. "Not yet. But don't worry, they will know who you really are." Panic flashed across her face. "Ethan, please, don't ask me for anything. You no longer have that right." She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. "I lost you, didn't I?" He stared at her, letting her see everything that was left inside him. "You lost me the moment you decided to lie." And then, without looking back, he left. Every step he took away from her was a weight he left behind. The marriage was over, the love had died, but he hadn't. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt free. Time passed, but the marks remained. Ethan has moved on, but not without scars. He carried with him the pain of betrayal, but also the certainty that he needed to start over, rebuild himself away from the rubble of the past. The divorce happened quickly, without contest, without appeals. Olivia didn't try to fight, didn't ask for a second chance. He seemed to know that any attempt would be in vain. He left her with the apartment, the furniture, the memories that now belonged to her. To him, none of it made sense. He needed something new, a place where he could breathe without feeling the weight of what he lost. The first few months were a test of endurance. He isolated himself, moving away from everything that reminded him of his previous life, refusing to entertain any trace of nostalgia. But little by little, he began to understand that he couldn't hide forever. Pain would one day need to give way to something different, something other than just anger or resentment. And that's how he met someone. Unplanned, not because I was looking for it. It happened simply, almost imperceptibly. A casual meeting, a conversation that required nothing more than the present. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to feel something new. It wasn't a rush, it wasn't an impulse to fill a void. It was a genuine connection, built without pressure, without empty promises. Meanwhile, Olivia faced the consequences of her choices. She found herself alone, facing her own mistakes with nowhere to run. The family, which had once been a safe haven, now looked at her with disappointment. She realized that in trying to maintain two lives, she ended up with none. The man for whom he risked everything, the one who promised a future by his side, didn't take long to reveal his true face. The boss, who was previously charming and seductive, became distant when he realized that she was no longer new, that the game was over. Without the risk, without the adrenaline of lying, there was no longer any interest. That's how, within a few months, she found herself discarded, replaced by another distraction. She tried to rebuild her own life, tried to find justifications for what she did, but she always came up against the truth. No one forced her to do anything. Everything was her choice. Every step, every decision. Olivia lived with regret for company, knowing that she lost the only man who ever truly cared about her. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't look back. He no longer carried the desire for revenge, nor did he let the past define who he was. He kept going, not because it was easy, but because he knew it was necessary. His greatest triumph was not destroying Olivia or making her pay for every mistake, but rather showing that he was capable of carrying on, growing, being happy without her. Life went on. The paths followed different directions. And in the end, each one received what they built. Olivia was left with the solitude she chose. Ethan found a new beginning. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Comment your opinion. I want to know what you think about this betrayal and its consequences. If you're not already subscribed, sign up now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. And remember, betrayal is never the way. Here on the channel, we do not support any type of infidelity. Until next time.